Hi, everyone. My name is Keith Gilbert. I'm a consultant, developer, educator, and author in the graphic design field. InDesign has been my great love for the last 20 years, and I'm excited to share some of what I've learned with you today. Thank you for spending the next 25 minutes with me. I'm going to pack lots of advanced tips into this session. I'll be moving fast, so be sure to download the session notes to help you later on as you practice these techniques. My goal today is that you'll pick up at least one or two tips, hopefully more, to speed up your work in InDesign. Remember, you can submit questions via the chat pod throughout the session. So without further ado, let's get started. So to begin with, we're going to start by looking at how to create grids quickly and easily via a variety of techniques. I'm going to select the rectangle frame tool here and begin to drag out a frame. And the important thing is I'm not going to let go of the mouse button. So while I keep the mouse button held down, I'm going to tap the arrow keys on the keyboard. I'm going to hit the right arrow key 3 times to create 3 columns, and then the up arrow key a couple times to create 2 more rows. So basically, I'm just tapping the left or right, up or down arrows to create more rows and columns. And once I've got it set the way I want, I let go of the mouse, and voila, I have an instant grid. Now I can do that same technique with ellipses, polygons, lines, etc. So I could take some ellipses here and just tap the arrow keys as I drag them out to create a grid of ellipses. Now we'll come back to that in a little bit here and see another application of that. But I want to show you here how to apply the same idea to duplicate existing artwork. So here I've got a group of some InDesign objects. And you guys know that I can Option or Alt drag to duplicate any InDesign object, right? That also works in Illustrator. And furthermore, I can either hold down Option or Alt first and then drag, or I can begin to drag and then add Option or Alt. Either way works. The reason I'm belaboring that point here is for this technique I'm going to show you next, it's very important that you hold down Option on the Mac or Alt on Windows first before you start to drag the object. Otherwise, this technique doesn't work. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt, drag this object to create a duplicate, and then with my third hand, I wish I had a third hand for this, I'm going to tap the right arrow key a couple times to create 2 more columns, and then the up arrow key a couple times to create 2 more rows, and let go of the mouse, and there I've got a perfect grid of those objects. Let me undo that. I'm going to do it one more time just because it's a little bit tricky. I'm going to hold down Option or Alt. And by the way, I'm holding down the Option or Alt key that is on the right side of my keyboard closest to the arrow keys on the keyboard because I don't have a third hand. And so I need to somehow reach the Option or Alt key and the arrow keys at the same time. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt, begin to drag this object, tap the right arrow key twice, the up arrow key twice, and there we go. So that's called gridified copy and is very, very useful. Likewise, I can do a gridified place. I'm going to hit Command D, Control D on Windows to access the file place command. I'm going to grab a bunch of images here. It loads them up into my cursor. It shows that I've got 12 images loaded up. And just like I did with empty frames, I can drag out here and begin to, basically begin to drag. I'm not letting go of the mouse button. And then I hit the right arrow key a couple times and the up arrow a couple times until I get the right number of rows and columns and let go. And then I probably would go up here and hit the fill frame proportionally to finish that off. Now, what if you don't like the gap between these? Well, let me undo that. And I'm going to do the same thing again. Drag out, tap the right arrow, I guess 3 times, up arrow twice, and I've got the grid defined the way I want now. I'm still not letting go of the mouse. And while the mouse is held down now, I'm going to hold down Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and tap the left arrow key a few times to reduce the gap between the columns, and then the down arrow key to reduce the gap between the rows. Again, all the while holding down Command or Control. And once I've got it the way that I want, I let go, finished off with fill frame proportionally, and there I've got a grid with a smaller gap. So you can adjust the gap while dragging out a grid by holding down Command or Control, Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and using the up and down, left and right arrow keys. In a similar vein, I can do what's called live distribute. If I select these 4 orange squares and just drag to the right using the right-hand handle here, they're going to all get wider or narrower, right? But if I do the same thing, if I grab this handle and then add the space bar, now it adjusts the spacing between the objects, which is really, really handy. Now, here's the important thing about this. If I hold down the space bar and try to grab this handle, that just gives me the grabber hand, which isn't what I want in this case. So I need to, in this case, grab the handle first, begin to drag, and then add the space bar in order to accomplish this live distribute business. So that's a little odd because that's kind of the opposite of what we were talking about earlier, where we had to hold down Option or Alt before we started the drag. So this all takes some practice and some getting used to, but eventually you'll get burned into your synapses and you'll be able to do it without thinking. Likewise, I can live distribute vertically with the same technique, or in both axes at once by grabbing a corner handle and holding down the space bar. Now, it turns out that this is really useful for creating patterns very quickly. So here I took a line using the line drawing tool and gridified it to create a bunch of them. And the important thing is this line has a stroke that is a light green in color set to multiply mode. So that if I put one of these on top of another one where they overlap, it gets darker. That's the key to this technique that we're going to see next here. So now I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to use live distribute. I'm going to grab a corner handle, begin to drag, add the space bar, and overlap these in some sort of interesting way. And look at that. I have an instant pattern that looks kind of cool. If I do that with circles, I would get something like this, or filled circles, something like this, or stars or polygons, or rotated squares. So the point is, if I select these and do live distribute again and overlap them in some other way, I get a completely different result, right? I can get a virtually, I have to be accurate here. For Pete's sake, I can't seem to grab that little handle. Try it again. There we go. So, it looks completely different than what I had before, right? So great for background patterns, that sort of thing. Now, I want to show you one more way to make a grid. Here I've got a frame selected that is exactly the size I want. If I go to my scripts panel, and if you don't have your scripts panel on the screen, it's located in Window, Utilities, Scripts. And if I go to the Applications folder and go into Samples and then JavaScript, you'll see a script called Make Grid. And with any rectangle selected, if you double click on Make Grid, it'll ask you how you want to cut it up And I'm going to tell it I want 3 rows, 4 columns, 2-point gutter. I want to delete the original. Okay, out of that, voila. I've got an instant grid of individual rectangles ready to be filled or whatever I want to do to them. So if you have an existing object that you want to make a grid out of, that's a simple way to do it. Now, once you have a grid created, you might want to spend some time adjusting it. And the gap tool, I've been here for a while in InDesign, but most people don't know about the gap tool. It's the fourth tool in the tool panel. U is the keyboard shortcut for it. And what's odd about the gap tool is you don't select anything first. So notice I don't have any of these images selected, but as I hover over them, InDesign highlights anywhere that it sees a gap or anything it perceives as a gap. And anytime it senses a gap like that, I can simply grab and drag. And so, I mean, just dragging with this with no modifiers or anything is incredibly useful. I mean, doing this kind of maneuver without the gap tool would be really time consuming. So I really like the gap tool for certain kinds of things. Now, where it gets really useful though is with the modifier keys, Command or Control, Option or Alt, or Shift. So I'm going to hold down the Command key on the Mac, Control key on Windows, and grab this gap here. And with the Command or Control key held down, it lets me change the size of the gap. And thankfully, it displays the size in a little tooltip there so that I can get the columns and rows the same if I want to. So that can be really useful. Let me undo that, and let's see what happens when we hold down the Option or Alt key. It's a little odd. What the Option or Alt key does is grabs the adjacent rows or columns and moves them. I'm not sure that's quite as useful, but you can do that if you need. What I think is really useful, though, is the Shift key. If I grab the Shift key and drag a boundary or a gap, look what it does. It kind of breaks it out of the grid and does this. So for creating like a Mondrian style layout, very, very quickly, very easily, I mean, that is fantastic. That's a quick way to create that sort of thing. Another way to disrupt a grid is to use the Pathfinder panel. The Pathfinder panel is located in Window, Object, and Layout Pathfinder. I've got it right here. And if I just overlap 2 frames in my grid and then select both of them and click this little Pathfinder icon right here, that will combine those 2 frames into one, disrupting the grid. I could do the same thing here, for example. Now in this case, I'm going to drag this one into this one, and then I'm going to bring this one to the front because it's the one in front whose picture gets retained. So then I'm going to select both of those and add them together with the Pathfinder, and now I could reposition the content within there. You could even do more than 2 at a time. So for example, I could take this, drag it into here, drag this, drag it into here, drag this over all of them, and then select all 4 of those and add them all together. And there we go. I mean, so once you learn all these different techniques, then you can combine them. So for example, I could say, oh, I guess I didn't want to do that. I'm going to select this, go back to my make grid script and tell it that I want to have maybe 2 columns and 1 row, and okay out of that, and split it back into 2. And then I could go put different content in this. So that gives you some different techniques for working with grids that makes grids very flexible. Now, while we're on the subject of grids, let's talk about tables, because tables are a grid-like kind of thing. And I want to show you a few different techniques for working with tables. First thing I want to point out is that if you select a column or a row, you can move inside that column and grab the column and drag it to a new location. So you have drag and drop capabilities with table rows and columns. Now you maybe knew that, but what I want to remind you of is that can be a great way to insert rows or columns quickly. So for example, if I wanted, the way most people would insert new rows between these two, or new columns between these two columns, would be to select this one and laboriously go to cell options, or I'm sorry, insert column, type in a number and tell it where they want it to put it and insert columns that way. A far quicker way would be to just select 3 columns, because I want to insert 3 columns here, and then just drag this over here, but add the Option or Alt key to duplicate those 3 columns into this location. So those columns are still over here, but I duplicated them here, so now I could then go and put new content in there or whatever and into the inserted columns. So it's a handy way to insert new rows and columns. The trouble is, on a table like this, here I've got a cell that spans all my columns. Here I've got a cell that spans 3 columns. Here's a cell that spans 2 columns. Well, the trouble with that is once you've got spans interrupting things, you can no longer go inside a column and drag and drop it, which is unfortunate. So what would I do if I needed to insert new columns in between these two? Well, there's a technique you can use to do that, kind of hidden. If I go to the divider between these columns and just pull to the right, that just makes that column wider. You already knew that. But if I grab this divider and start to drag and then add the Option or Alt key, it will insert new columns as I drag to the right. Likewise, if I go to a row divider and drag down and add Option or Alt, it will insert new rows that way. So you can do that even in the midst of spans, which is nice. So it's a really fast way to add new rows and columns. Another common need in tables is to create angled table heads. And InDesign will let you create vertical table heads, but not angled. But I've got a script for you that's free to do that. All you do is put your cursor inside a table and download and install this script called Create Angled Table Heads. Answer a few questions in this box. It comes with some documentation that will help you determine what these things do. OK out of it, and boom, the table heads are converted to rotated angled table heads. Encourage you to download that script if you have use for that sort of thing. Another thing that's common in tables is the need to sort table data. I can select the column I want to sort on and run this sort tables script. It's a free script from Peter Carroll. And when I double click on it, it asks me how I want to sort, a few other options, OK out of that, and it sorts the table data without screwing up the formatting. I want to briefly touch on a couple ways to restart numbering. So here I've got some paragraphs that are numbered with InDesign's automatic paragraph numbering. And the trouble is they're just continuing through the whole thing. Well, one way to restart is to right-click on the paragraph you want to restart at and say Restart Numbering. And that restarts it at 1. Then I could go to this one and say Restart Numbering, and then go to this one and say Restart Numbering. Trouble is, I might forget to do that somewhere in a 300-page book or something. So I'd rather have it be completely automatic. So let's see how to do that. There's a kind of a cryptic method for doing this. It works great, requires some setup though. I've got 2 paragraph styles in use here. This is a paragraph style called body, and the numbered paragraphs are called body text numbered. And I need to modify both of those styles for this to work. So step one is I select the body style paragraph, edit that, and I go into bullets and numbering, and I actually turn on numbering for that body text paragraph. Don't panic. We're going to turn that off in a second. The way I turn it off is I go in here and remove all the stuff from the number field so that the number disappears. And then I need to go in here and tell it to create a new list, and I can name this anything I want. I'll just call it numbers. And I need to make this level 1, and I need this to start at number 1. So I set this up specifically this way. It's very important to set it up exactly like this, and then the numbers won't appear. And then I need to go to one of these body text numbered paragraphs and edit that style. Go into bullets and numbering, choose that same list, the one I called numbers, make it level 2, fill out the rest of these options just like this, OK out of it, and now it restarts at numbering at 1 every time there's a body text paragraph in the middle. So in other words, if I were to hit a return here, type some more text, and make that body, it would automatically restart in the following paragraph. Works really nice once you get it set up. Have time to show you one more set of tips here having to do with previewing fonts. I want to select all this text here and try some different typefaces and see what they look like in context of my layout. And you may know that you can go in here and just hover over different typefaces, and as you do, it shows them in my layout here. Trouble is, there's that ugly black highlight that makes it a little hard for me to picture. So first tip here is down the bottom right corner of the screen, there's this little icon here for split screen. If you click on that icon, that will split the screen into 2. So now I've got 2 views of the same document. Now this is page 20. So I'm going to go over here, click on this layout, on this view, jump to page 20, fit that on the screen, and I'm going to select the text here, but the beauty is I can select it here and it doesn't show up selected here. That's the tip. So now I can go in here and preview the thing without that highlight in the way, which is really nice. Second tip is I want to point out that, at the moment I am filtering here to show only handwritten fonts. Okay, let's actually change that to decorative. We'll change it to decorative and distressed fonts. And I'm looking through my system here, and I don't really like any of these. So I want to go out to fonts.adobe.com and see if there's one there that I might like. Well, if you click on Find More, it will display all of the decorative fonts on fonts.adobe.com, basically because I have them filtered. And these are all fonts that I do not have installed on my system, but I can preview them all in the context of my layout without having to install them first. Once I find one that I like, I just click on this little cloud arrow icon to activate it and wait for it to finish activating. And once it's done activating, I can click to install it or click to apply it, and I'm done. To unsplit the screen, I just click on this little icon down in the bottom right corner again, and away we go. Whew, that's it. In 25 minutes, you learned how to do all these different things. You saw lots of different ways to create grids with what I would call the gridify commands. Then we looked at live distribute to adjust spacing, which is useful in itself, but it's also useful combined with gridify for creating quick patterns. We saw how to create grids with the make grid script. We saw how to adjust grids with the gap tool and the Pathfinder commands. We saw how to do a bunch of stuff to tables, like rearranging columns and rows via drag and drop, how to insert rows and columns while dragging with the Alt or Option key. We saw how to create angled table heads with a script and how to sort table rows with a script. And we looked at 2 different ways to restart list numbering, and finished up by a couple tips for previewing fonts in your layout. It's a lot of stuff packed into 25 minutes. Hopefully everybody learned something. Enjoy the rest of the conference. My contact info is on the screen, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions about any of this stuff. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.